Hello everybody, good afternoon friends. Uh, this is a topic from psychology. As you all know, psychology is an experimental science which requires some empirical evidences to argue and to support the theories, and for that purpose psychologists use several research designs and research methods. So, this topic today that I have selected for the presentation is a quasi experimental design. Quasi experimental design is, we have to put that in a proper perspective of experimental designs. Actually, there are several experimental designs which and based on that we can say that experiments are conducted in the laboratory, they are conducted in the field, and quasi experimental designs are used mostly in the field experiments. If we have to understand exactly where quasi experimental designs are used, let us look at the proper background of experimental research. The background is experiments are classified as laboratory experiments and field experiments, and field experiments are classified further into true experiments and quasi experiments. So, in short, quasi experiments are extended parts of the lab experiments or true experiments, and the word quasi experiments or the word quasi in quasi experiments means which resembles, quasi means resemblance to the true experiments. So, in real sense quasi experiments are like the experiments which look like or will appear to be like a true experiments or the lab experiments, but in reality they are not conducted in the stringent conditions, therefore, they do not qualify for the definition of true experiments or lab experiments. So, under these considerations, let us look at the meaning, characteristics and types of quasi experiments. Field experiments are conducted to find out basically the generalizability of the laboratory findings, that is, to study the external validity of an experiment, and for that purpose field experiments are conducted, and the quasi experiments particularly as a part of field experiments are conducted to improve the conditions in which people live, that is, to bring the change in their lifestyle. The change has to be a desirable change in their lifestyle, that is people's lifestyle, and to study that whether interventions can be conducted by several agencies including government, NGO or by some group of researchers which basically study the effects of interventions in bringing the desirable change in the lifestyle of people. Therefore, these quasi experimental designs or this approach is also used to study the outcomes of intervention programs implemented by government or by NGOs. In psychology, we also classify experimental work into two categories. The first one is called as pure research and the other one is called as applied research. In pure research, generally lab experiments are a part of the pure research, and true and quasi experiments are a part of applied research. The distinction between quasi and applied research is based on based on the objectives of the research and based on the method that you use to study the phenomena. That is, in pure research you will see that research is conducted to verify the hypothesis in the laboratory setup, and that contributes to the knowledge from the experimental methods which has greater internal validity. Whereas applied research is conducted with a broader objective of finding out the applications of the theories or some concepts which are studied in psychology and which are believed that have greater applications to understand and solve the problems of human lifestyle. So, from that perspective, quasi experiments are conducted in the field. Quasi experiments are conducted in natural settings and also in the field setup where we do not really manipulate the variables the way we do in the experimental setup. However, the experiments which are conducted in natural setup, they also look like the experiments conducted in the laboratory. Therefore, the word quasi experiments. One of the objectives of these quasi experiments is, for example, to verify the government's policies or government's several programs which are implemented in the real life or field setup, which are also directed towards bringing out the changes in people and their behavior, like lifestyle, the conduct of the people, attitudes of the people, change in their opinions, practices, etc. The policy research or the research, the applied research is also conducted to study the effectiveness of the policy implementation by the government, and for that the approach that is used is called as quasi experiments, and they are conducted in natural setups. For example, the noteworthy examples are, suppose government implements new tax system or midday meals program, which is implemented right now in Maharashtra and in some other parts of the country, or giving coffee breaks at different times, maybe in industries or in offices. If the coffee breaks are introduced at a particular time, whether it will have a desirable positive effect or not, to study that or to study such phenomena or ideas in the field setup or natural setup, the experiments which are conducted could be called as quasi experimental designs. There are also some famous programs which are implemented by the state governments and by some other agencies, including administering the doses to children and to study their effects or find out their effects on the children. Then some medicines like polio, etc. All these programs can be evaluated by following quasi experimental research methodology. One of the objectives of quasi experiments is to evaluate the outcomes of these programs. For this purpose, we use quasi experimental research. Institutions like government agencies, NGOs, industrial and business organizations are keen on evaluating the outcomes of their policies and practices. When research is conducted to evaluate the programs, it will be considered as program evaluation research. Quasi experiment is used to achieve this objective of evaluating the programs. Therefore, this is also one of the popular methods used for program evaluation research. Let us look into the differentiation between true experiments and quasi experiments. As the word quasi experiments, I have said it, that it resembles like an experiment, but still we also conduct true experiments in the field, and we also conduct quasi experiments for the students of psychology and other social sciences who are interested in learning the distinction between true experiments and quasi experiments. We must find out some characteristics of true experiments also. For example, it is known that experiments are conducted under controlled situations. Experiments also are known as observations made under controlled situations. From this perspective, laboratory setup fulfills this condition of experimentation, where experiments are conducted under stringent conditions, whereas true experiment is not conducted under that stringent conditions. Therefore, it it is slightly different from the laboratory experiment. Whereas quasi experiment is conducted in the field and it is much more different from the lab experiments and also from the true experiments. So, to differentiate among these three categories of experimental approach like lab experiments, true experiments and quasi experiments, let us look at some of the characteristics which differentiate between the true experiments and the quasi experiments. The true experiment researcher manipulates an IV. IV means independent variable with treatment, and comparison conditions are exercising a high degree of control on the subject's randomization and manipulating the IV from conditions to conditions. A true experiment is one that leads to an unambiguous outcome related to the cause of an event. That means, by using lab and true experiments, one can confidently say that an outcome that is caused by an independent variable which was manipulated or which was implemented by the researcher. Whereas, such a statement cannot be made in the quasi experimental setup, and the quasi experimental setup therefore is slightly different compared to the true experiments. The true experiments also are categorized by implementation of the treatment or intervention and high degree of control over the arrangement of experimental conditions, assignment of participants and appropriate comparison groups. Now, these are the three important features of the experimental true experimental conditions. That is, the way the experiment has been arranged, then the experimental conditions which are created and the participants who are assigned to these different conditions, or the use of comparative comparison groups. All these are the features of true experiments. Some of these aspects are also used in the quasi experiments, but they have still different features and we have to understand that also. Now, we also face several problems in conducting such field research or field studies in real life situations. Therefore, we also have to see what are the different obstacles that we face in conducting true experiments in natural settings. The first difficulty is that of obtaining permission and gaining access to participants. Random assignment is perceived as unfair, but that is the best way to prove that the new treatment is effective, and therefore, arriving at a random assignment is one more obstacle while conducting the true experiments in the field setup. Then there are several other features which are also important obstacles in conducting the experiments in natural setup. One of those is called as contamination. Second one is experimenter expectancy effect, and novelty effects may bring problems in the conduct of true experiments. Therefore, in short, we can say that conducting true experiments in the natural setup also has several difficulties, and it is not that easy to conduct the experiments in the field setup. So, right from taking the permission from the government officials or from the organizations, then assigning subjects randomly to different conditions because it is in a natural setup, and therefore, it might induce some contamination. It also introduces the experimenter expectancy effect, and sometimes the effects or outcome are seen in the dependent variable as a result of novelty. Therefore, how to take care of these novelty effects is also a biggest challenge, and these are some of the challenges or obstacles that the researchers experience while conducting true experiments in natural setup. Therefore, a lot of information has to be processed before one really plans the true experiments. quasi experiments, in contrast to the true experiments, it provides an important alternative to true experiments. Quasi experiments lack the degree of control found in the true experiments. This is one of the features that I already pointed out, that there is a difference between this is a major difference between a true experiment and a quasi experiment. That is, the amount of control that the researcher has in the laboratory setup or in the true experimental setup is missing in the quasi experimental setup. And since it is a natural setup, it is not desirable also that the experimenter will have a complete control over the experimental situations. And therefore, there are certain features compared to true experiments or laboratory experiments that we can see how they are different from the other two conditions. And one of those is it lacks random assignment of participants. Random assignment of participants is a very important feature of experimental conditions, and that is observed very strictly in the laboratory setup, and it is equally observed in the true experimental setup, whereas it becomes very, very difficult to assign the subjects randomly in the quasi experimental setup, and therefore, this is considered as one of the biggest challenge in the quasi experimental setup. In fact, it is because of that this is generally referred to as quasi experiments. There are certain common designs that we follow in quasi experimental designs research. One of them is called as one group pre-test post-test design. This is the first of its nature. This particular design could also be used in the experimental setup, or it could be used in the laboratory setup. And there is second type of design is called as non-equivalent control group design. Both these designs could be seen pictorially like this. This is called as one group or single group design. In this design, we say we conduct observations on two occasions, occasion 1 and occasion 2. The intervention program is conducted in between. Now, observation 1 is time 1 observation and observation 2 is time 2 observations. Basically, when researcher is interested in comparing the outcomes of occasion 1 and occasion 2, or observations made on occasion 1 and occasion 2, and in between the intervention program is conducted, it is expected that observations on occasion 2 would be improved compared to the observation of occasion 1. So, here behavior of a single group is measured. O1 is occasion 1, this is an intact group, no random assignments of participants, and the X stands for treatment here. So, the treatment is given to this group assuming that it will bring changes in the behavior of the participants. After the treatment, O2 is measured. If the expected difference is seen between O and O2, then the researcher can say that the treatment is effective. However, there are a lot of problems in such a conclusion, and therefore, researcher will not be able to come to this conclusion very confidently. It is because of the several limitations of this particular design, which is the very crude and the simplest form of quasi experimental design. This is also called as a bad experiment because it does not fulfill several other conditions of cause and effect relationship verification, and therefore, a modification of this design is suggested in this form, and this is called as non-equivalent control group design. Now, this non-equivalent control group design is an improvement over the single group pre-test post-test design. Here in this design, a treatment and a comparison groups are compared by using pre-test and post-test measures. Basically, there is a before the intervention program is implemented, observations, that is O1 is made. It is made on the experimental group and it is made on the control group also. Then on experimental group, intervention program is implemented and the observations are made on experimental group after the intervention. Whereas in the control group, there is no intervention, but there are observations made on that group on two occasions, that is occasion 1 and occasion 2, which can also be said as pre-test, post-test, but there is no intervention for the control group, whereas pre-test, post-test observations can be said for the experimental group where there is an intervention. So, like if the two groups are similar on O1 and differ more at O2, after following the treatment, researcher makes the claim of treatment effect. That means, on the occasion 2, the experimental group observations should be higher, much higher than the control group's observations on occasion 2. And if this is seen, then it can be very easily claimed that the change that has taken place between the experimental group's observations at time 2 and control group's observations at time 2, that difference can be attributed to the intervention program. And the intervention program means the treatment that was given to experimental group, and this intervention program was absent in the control group. Therefore, there is no expectation that the control group would change from occasion 1 to occasion 2. However, it was expected that experimental group would change from occasion 1 to occasion 2 and due to the intervention group. However, if the change takes place significantly higher than the control group change at occasion 2, then it could be legitimately claimed that the treatment has a positive outcome in case of experimental group, and there is no different outcome in the control group because there was no treatment. So, this is how non-equivalent control group design allows us to verify researchers' hypothesis. However, there are certain questions, those are raised in the context of conducting these experiments in the field setup or in the natural setup. There are certain threats to internal validity due to history, maturation testing, regression, etc., which needs to be controlled here. Look, since there is no random assignment of the subjects in the quasi experimental setup, the effects due to history, maturation and regression cannot be taken care of, and therefore, these are considered as the threats to internal validity of the experimental approach. Now, there are issues about the external validities also here, and generally it is accepted that compared to true experiments or laboratory experiments, quasi experiments will have higher generalizability. However, it needs to be critically examined, and this generalizability can be achieved by replicating the findings on different populations, different settings and on different occasions or different time. If the observations made in one particular study by a researcher by following quasi experimental approach are replicated on different population or different settings and on different time occasions, then it will add to the strength of the research findings, and therefore, it will add to the generalizability, which further is accepted as an evidence of external validity in quasi experimental research. There are also two other designs available in quasi experimental designs. The first one of that is called as simple interrupted time series design. The time series design would look like this, that before the intervention is planned, observations are made on the participants on several occasions. For example, number of times the observations are made on the dependent variable of interest of a researcher, that is observation 1, observation 2, observation 3, 4, 5 and so on, with some time gap in between. Once you have a data on the dependent variable on this particular group, where you have observed or made observations on number of occasions, you planned intervention program. It is assumed that this intervention program will have a positive change or effect in the dependent variable. It is with this intention these studies are planned. They are called as interrupted time series design. Here, before the interventions, observations are made on number of occasions on the same participants, then intervention program is planned. After the intervention also, the observations are made on number of occasions, that could be occasion 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and so on, and then comparison is made. It is believed that the intervention will have a positive effect and therefore the change will take place after the intervention in a positive direction compared to the observations made before the intervention. And just to verify this hypothesis, interrupted time series design is used. For this design, the availability of periodic measures before and after the treatment is the main feature of this particular design. That means you must have the availability of these particular measures before and after the treatment. For example, one of the example that could be given, this experiment was conducted by Cook and Campbell, where the suspension of license of the drivers, motorcyclists, for driving very speedily was adopted by the police department. As a policy, then if the drivers are found this way, driving at a higher speed, at an undesirable speed, then their license could be suspended. And then police department wanted to see whether by adopting this particular policy will bring any change in the driver's behavior. Therefore, in this study it is observed that before this suspension of license policy was implemented, observations were made on the number of occasions, then suspension of license policy was implemented, and then observations were made after that also in the driving behavior. It was found that this particular policy has worked and shown the positive results in the driving behavior of the motorcyclists. So, studies like this are conducted in the natural setup, and the kind of approach that is used will be called as interrupted time series design. Or there are also a number of studies which are conducted about the shoplifting offences, and the study was reported by Ross and White, and it is reported in the literature. Then there is extended part of this time series design. Now, this time series design, the extended part of the time series design here is with non-equivalent control group. So, the earlier was time series design without the control group. Now, this is with the control group, but with the non-equivalent control group. Here you can see in the design, the observations are made from time 1 to time 5, that is time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4 and time 5. The intervention program will be implemented. Again, the observations are made from occasion 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, and then at the same time observations also are made on the control group. However, here it is assumed that the experimental group and control group are basically not equivalent to each other, and that is how this particular design is called as time series design with non-equivalent control group. So, the intervention program is implemented on the experimental group, but there is no intervention program on the control group. Basically, both the groups, they come from the same background, from the same situations, from the same field setup. However, there is no equivalence assumed in the group, these two groups. However, it allows us to make the observations on two occasions, that is for experimental group before the intervention and after the intervention. For the control group, you make the observations, number of observations from time 1, time 5, time 6 to time 10 and like this. So, we do not have any intervention in between. However, we have several observations without any intervention, and then these things are compared with each other. Then if the changes have taken place positively in the experimental group, which basically had intervention, and if the changes are better than the control group, then it allows researcher to prove his or her hypothesis. And that is how time series with non-equivalent control group design is considered to be better than the previous time series design. The research, the quasi-experimental research and true experimental research also has applications in the program evaluation setup. Now, program evaluation research is one of the main features that we will find not only psychologists who are interested in evaluating the programs of the NGOs, government, or in industrial setup or in some school setup, but we also have several programs conducted by different agencies, and all these probably would be interested in finding out the outcome of these agencies or their implemented policies, whether there is a desirable change that is taking place in the participants on whom these policies are implemented. So, to conduct this program, to conduct the evaluation of this program, the methods those are followed are called as program evaluation methods. This is also, in other words, known as program evaluation research. Program evaluation research basically assesses the effectiveness of human service organizations and their programs on programs of human well-beings. The basic objective is that whenever these organizations who are involved in providing service to the masses or the public in general, whether these services are serving the purpose of bringing a positive change in the people or not. For this purpose, we need to evaluate these government's policies and different programs that these organizations, government as well as non-government organizations, implement in the field setup. We need to have some concrete evidences about the effectiveness of implementation of such programs. So, research could be conducted to evaluate the outcome of these programs in the real life setup, and this will be called as then a program evaluation research. Basically, program evaluation research provides feedback to administrators about their services, whether these services are really achieving the purpose for which these were implemented. And therefore, to get the feedback, all the administrators, right from local government to central government or different central governments policies, they would be interested in getting the feedback on the outcome of the implementation of these policies. For example, the scheme of midday meal which is implemented in Maharashtra in the schools, whether that is really bringing a desirable change or not. If that, when one needs to verify that, that means one needs to find out the effectiveness of these policies, then the program evaluation research can be conducted. There are several schemes of various departments who are involved in welfare activities of the masses. All that can be really evaluated by following the program evaluation approach, and therefore, the true experiments or quasi experiments have a great contribution in finding out the status of these such programs and whether they are really serving the purpose for which these programs were planned. And to get into that, the government agencies or non-government agencies will be interested in getting this feedback in a concrete and precise manner, and for this purpose we as a social scientist or psychologist, in fact people from the field of management, commerce and other areas will be interested in these particular methods. The basic research and applied research actually is reciprocal to each other. This is the last point that I would talk about the program evaluation, that is, how do we really differentiate between the pure and applied research? This was one of the points that was discussed in the beginning of this presentation. So, at the end I would like to throw some light on this, that we do assume that is social scientists who are involved in, and psychology is one of those sciences, anthropology could be one more, economics also is like that. So, all these social sciences who get into the pure or basic and applied research sometimes face the difficulty in compromising between these two approaches. So, there is a relationship between basic or pure research and applied research. We did not really stretch this distinction to a great extent, because both the pure and applied research, they support each other. In fact, without the pure research we cannot think of applying the research findings of the pure research in the applied setup. So, applied research allows us to extend and verify our findings which we find in the laboratory setup, and then whether these findings have any worth from the point of view of applications, then we get into applied research. And it is where then in the field setup the worth of experimental findings which are obtained in the laboratory or true experimental setup, they are tested in the applied research setup. Now, whenever these findings are generalizable to the larger, bigger populations on different occasions, then we can say confidently that the findings which are observed in the lab setup or true experimental setup have greater value even in the applied setup. And there are researches conducted to verify the applicability of these research findings from the lab setup to the field setup. And we generally come to know the value or worth of the laboratory experiments, laboratory findings after applying this research in the field setup. Therefore, field research or applied research is reciprocal in that sense, that is, which supports the findings in the actual setup where there is an application of the basic research findings. It gives support to the basic research finding, and therefore, this research can be said that it is reciprocal to the field setup. On the other hand, research can be conducted in the applied setup, and there could be some basic issues which can be generated based on the observations of applied setup, and that needs to be further focused or addressed and systematically answered, and the studies can be planned in the lab or true experimental setup. When that happens, the hypothesis could be generated out of the observations made in the made by the applied research in the field setup, and those findings could be really tested in the laboratory setup. And vice versa, the findings which are generated in the laboratory setup can be tested and extended to the findings in the applied research setup. Therefore, it is said that there is no reason to differentiate or to stretch the differences between the basic research and applied research to a great extent. Basically, both these researches, they start at different point, but ultimately they support each other, and therefore, the basic research, the worth of basic research can be evaluated by studying its applications in the field setup or natural setup, and whatever the hypotheses are generated in applied research in the natural setup or observations made in the natural setup, those also can be framed in a systematic manner and further hypothesis can be tested in the laboratory setup or true setup. That will again support the worth of applied research also. So, like this, the basic research and applied research, they support each other. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.